the government is today releasing its draft legislation for proposed tobacco control to back World No Tobacco Day. Here's Mark Butler, the Health and Aged Care Minister, speaking about that.
It's also an important occasion to recognise that there are emerging threats, and I've talked on a number of occasions now about the threat to all of the achievements, all of the work undertaken over recent decades to fight tobacco that is presented by vaping. Essentially a product that was presented to governments and communities around the world as a pathway out of cigarettes, a therapeutic product to help long-term smokers kick the habit, has demonstrably become a pathway into cigarettes, particularly for the youngest Australians. It is no accident, given the huge increases we've seen in vaping rates among young Australians over the course of the last 3 years, that now the only cohort in the Australian community that is seeing smoking rates actually increase is the youngest members of our community. Now, 10 years ago, Australia was rightly regarded as a leader in the global fight against tobacco, substantially as a result of the world-leading reforms that Nicola Roxon led as part of the former Labor government to introduce plain packaging and graphic warnings in particular. People will remember that those reforms were hard fought by the tobacco industry. We had to deal with 3 legal challenges to those reforms, and we were victorious. We were successful in all 3 of those legal challenges. As a result of those reforms, there are today 1 million fewer smokers than would otherwise have been the case, with all of the huge advantage that brings to the quality and the length of life, but also the lower cost to the public health system that is a result of that as well. Over the last 10 years, though, it's clear that there has been no significant action being taken to build on the reforms that Nicola Roxon led a decade ago. The former government, the former Liberal and National Party government, recorded increases to tobacco excise through their term amounting to 152%. Tobacco excise was increased by 152% under the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments, but none of that additional revenue was reinvested into new tobacco control programs or new public health measures of the type that we announced at the last budget 3 weeks ago to introduce a world-leading lung cancer screening program. So very, very big increases in revenue through increases in tobacco excise, but no substantial new tobacco control measures were put in place by the former government. Perhaps that was no surprise because that government was populated by people who, when in opposition to the last Labor government, did not support our tobacco control legislation until the very last day. People will remember particularly that Peter Dutton, as the Shadow Health Minister at the time, described Nicola Roxon's reforms as a bridge too far. A bridge too far were the words he used to describe Nicola Roxon's package of world-leading reforms that have been taken up by dozens of countries around the world. Now, as a result of the lack of any additional action taken over the last 9 years, as I said, smoking rates have essentially flatlined. After decades of decline here in Australia, they have essentially flatlined. And a recent study published in the British Medical Journal only a couple of weeks ago has indicated to us and to the community that we are currently not on track to meet the targets that were agreed by all governments, initiated by the former government, agreed by all governments in the National Tobacco Strategy, particularly to reduce daily smoking rates to 10% by 2025 and to 5% across the community by 2030, as well as substantial inroads in Indigenous smoking rates. That is why 6 months ago I announced our intention as a government to renew the fight against tobacco and to build on the world-leading reforms that Nicola Roxon initiated when we were last in government. And today I am publishing our draft legislation and a consultation paper on the Department of Health website to indicate very clearly what I intend to introduce to the Parliament later this year. That draft legislation, which is substantial, amounts to about 300 pages, reflects the measures that I announced back in November. Those measures are deeply informed by research, which is obviously undertaken still across the world about effective measures to deal with tobacco, but also informed by some of the experience and action taken by countries to which we usually compare ourselves, countries that have become global leaders in the fight against tobacco, like New Zealand, like Canada and the UK. Broadly, these measures...
That's where we'll leave the Health Minister, Mark Butler, speaking there in Canberra, outlining some of those ambitious goals from the government to reduce our smoking rates here.